Welcome to Age of Noob everyone, and let's tackle the final generic eco upgrades in Age of Empires 4, namely food technologies. I was originally planning on making an all-encompassing food techs video, but I soon realized how much of a mammoth task that is. Hence, we'll explore these bit by bit, starting with survival techniques. As usual, there's a bit of nuance to this technology as well, so without further ado, let's dive right in. Alright, let's begin with the fundamentals. Survival techniques can be researched in the Dark Age through your mill. It costs 50 wood and 100 gold to research and takes 75 seconds from start to finish. On paper, it increases hunter meat gather rate by 10% and carry capacity by plus 15. Since I don't trust the tooltips in this game, I tested whether or not survival techniques impacts gather rates on sheep, and thankfully it doesn't. This means that the tooltip is accurate and only improves gather rates of your villagers collecting food from both the deer and wild boars. And finally, every deer camp you scout on the map should have 7 deer, each having 350 food. This means that each deer camp provides 2450 food when fully harvested. Boars, on the other hand, are out and about solo, but those beasts have 2000 food each. Speaking of spawns, wild boars are supposed to spawn 1 per player on the map. I am saying supposed to because there are 2 important factors here. 1. Boars typically spawn much further away than other resources from your original town center, so a clear ownership of a boar, like in Age of Empires 2, doesn't really apply here. And 2. Map generation in Age of Empires 4 overall sucks and needs quite a bit of work to make things a lot fairer for players. For example, in some 2v2 Arabia games, only 3 boars spawned instead of 4. In 1v1s, I thankfully didn't see a boar missing in all of my tests, but in team games, it's a hit or miss. That said, all you need to know is that if the map generation works properly in your game, every player should be able to scout a boar of their own on the map, even if it's a bit further forward than usual. Deer camps, on the other hand, are thankfully a lot better. First of all, almost every player can find a deer camp relatively close to their original town center. However, unlike boars, players should also be able to find additional neutral deer camps a bit further out on the map once they've hunted all 7 of their deer. Hence, even if there is a map generation mishap and a deer camp or 2 doesn't spawn properly, there should still be at least 1 deer camp per player as a guaranteed resource in the game, so keep that in mind. And finally, only 8 villagers can collect food from a deer or a boar at a given time, and any additional villager will stand by idly until a space frees up. Okay, now that we've covered the fundamentals, let's begin testing villagers on deer with and without survival techniques to see how big of an impact they really do. Since deer locations are random and some deer can even run away further from the villagers, I decided to pre-kill all of the deer and carry all 7 using a professional scout within 1 tile range of the mill. This way, I'll ensure that the numbers are not skewed due to RNG. 5 villagers can collect all 2450 food from the 7 deer in roughly 12 minutes. This means that the collection rate is 203 food per minute. When we add survival techniques, the same 5 villagers can collect the 2450 food in just under 10 minutes, resulting to 247 food per minute. This means that we get an improvement of 44 food per minute, or roughly a 22% improvement. But hang on a second, didn't we just say that the improved gather rate in the tooltip read just 10%? How are we getting more than double that amount? Well, I had to do some checking to be absolutely sure that there weren't any bugs. When we extract the actual gather rates from the game files themselves, we know that a villager with no upgrades is supposed to collect 10 food from a deer in exactly 12.12 seconds. And when I did the test, yeah, I did get the same result. After survival techniques, a villager is able to collect 10 food in just over 10 seconds, so this does match our original finding. So what gives? Well, it's the insane additional plus 15 carry capacity that comes with survival techniques. At first glance, it's very easy to brush it off as an average number, but that increases the carry capacity from 10 to 25, which is 150% more carry capacity. In practical terms, this means that a villager without survival techniques has to drop off 50 food 5 times in increments of 10, while a villager with survival techniques only has to drop off 25 food twice, saving 3 back and forth trips from the deer to the mill. And this is absolutely massive. Since this was an oversight from me in my original test, I realized that the 22% improvement that I arrived to was a disservice to survival techniques, as I've optimized the collection by minimizing walk time through lining up the carcasses very closely to the drop-off point. Now, this 22% is still useful for you folks because it does apply to scenarios where you use professional scouts to drop off deer by your town center, for example, but let's go for another, more common way of collecting deer, and that's by just milling it. That said, I still had to ensure that the tests were all equal, so I pre-killed 1 deer just within a tile of the constructed mill, 3 deer 2 tiles to the left of the mill, 1 deer 2 tiles to the bottom right, and 2 deer 2 tiles to the right. And I used a professional scout to ensure that the carcasses were in identical locations. I think this scenario is now pretty realistic to send villagers to in your game, so let's dive into the numbers again. The collection rate of 5 unupgraded villagers naturally take a severe hit, as they took an additional 105 seconds to finish off all 7 deer in roughly 14 minutes, resulting in just 177 food per minute. 5 villagers with survival techniques were able to finish off all 7 deer in just under 11 minutes, resulting in 230 food per minute. This is a whopping 30% improvement in collection rate. The fact that unupgraded villagers need to drop off food more than double the number of times makes a huge difference here. Hence, the worse your deer is positioned due to RNG, the more value you will get from survival techniques. If we calculate the payback time for 5 villagers, we end up with just over 4 minutes, and this includes the 75 seconds research time. This honestly could be one of the rare technologies in Age of Empires 4 that might be worth picking up with just 5 villagers, as none of the other technologies I've looked at so far made sense even before the 20 villager mark. If we move on to 10 villagers, they can finish off all 7 deer in just over 7 minutes with no upgrades, resulting in 342 food per minute. With survival techniques, 10 villagers take 95 fewer seconds, resulting in 439 food per minute. This means that the improvement is just under 30% due to the idle time caused by the 8 villager collection limit for the last deer. That said, the payback time is now only 2.8 minutes, which is a pretty good number. This means that the sweet spot of hunting deer with survival techniques is 8 villagers, as you'll get an improvement of 30% in collection rate and a payback time of roughly 3 minutes. Now that is a good deal. Now that we've fully covered the deer, let's move on to the mighty boar. Luckily, boars are singular and we don't have RNG to worry about in our calculations. Hence, I conducted the tests with the boar killed within 1 tile of a mill constructed nearby. Since you cannot gather food from a boar with more than 8 villagers at a time, I decided to just test for 8 villagers, which should be the most common scenario in your games anyway. Without any upgrades, 8 villagers collected all 2,000 food in 335 seconds, which translates to 358 food per minute. Once you do get survival techniques, the food per minute jumps to 429, as they can finish off the boar in 55 fewer seconds. This means that you gather 70 more food per minute after the upgrade, and your payback time should be roughly 3.5 minutes. Again, not too shabby. There's really not much else to analyze here due to the 8 villager limit. Survival techniques is just an overall good technology to pick up before hunting a boar. But let's take one step further and discuss the payback through a more holistic approach. Now, those payback times you saw in the previous sections were in isolation. This means that if you research survival techniques before hunting 7 deer with 8 villagers, you'll get your investment back quite quickly at roughly 3 minutes. If you don't commit to more villagers at that exact time, then that's the number you'd adhere to. But what if you don't? What if you send 8 villagers to hunt 7 deer, then move to a nearby boar to hunt it? Well, your payback time won't really change here, but what you will gain is roughly 330 food a minute quicker. That's pretty significant, as you'd have to wait a full minute more to finish off the boar without survival techniques otherwise. Obviously, if you're playing on a large team game map and you are able to hunt multiple deer camps or boars, then survival techniques will keep paying dividends, as it's an overall strong technology. That said, there's one small caveat that I have to mention before moving on though, and it's the villager walk time. For deer, it's not too bad as deer camps aren't too far away, at least the one closest to your first town center anyway, but boars are usually quite far. This means that if you didn't build a nearby town center and are moving villagers from there, the numbers you saw in this video will be worse depending on how long your villagers take time walking to the boar or the additional deer camps. Hence, if you instruct your villagers to walk halfway across the map that will take them a minute to get to, then the value you get from survival techniques for the additional camps will be severely hindered, so don't forget that. Great, now that we've covered everything we need to know about survival techniques, let's run through some rules of thumb as always for you to apply in your games. Number 1. While you can definitely hunt deer or boars with fewer than 8 villagers, it's safe to say that 8 villagers is the most efficient way to gather food from huntable resources. Hence, unless you're adhering to a tight build order that instructs you otherwise, send 8 villagers to hunt to a given camp and not one more. Number 2, and this is an extension to the first rule, make sure you research survival techniques at 8 hunters, and ideally finish researching just before they begin hunting. You can technically still research it with just 5 hunters, but you'll have to wait just a bit over a minute for it to pay back. With 8 villagers, you'll get an improvement of 30% and get back your investment in just 3 minutes, which is great value, so stick with that. Number 3, just in case you're in a scenario in which a deer camp and a boar are in equal distance to your hunters, always go for the deer first. The payback time for 7 deer is roughly half a minute quicker than the boar, and you'll get 450 more food for your 50 wood mill investment. I can't think of a scenario in which boars should ever be prioritized over deer, especially since deer camps start closer to you in almost every map. In short, start with your closest deer first, then judge future huntables, be it deer or boar, based on distance. Number 4. While it is true that the more you hunt, the more value you get out of survival techniques, be wary of too much walk time for your 8 villagers. It might just make more sense to begin farming and keeping your villagers safe than sending them on a trek across the map for a dangerous and inefficient trip. Hence, you typically want to hunt the nearby deer and maybe the boar, but you don't need to venture too far away after that. Number 5. Almost never prioritize hunting to sheep, berries, or farms, as the base collection rate for all of these resources are better than both deer and boar. Now, farms require a significant wood investment, so it's a more nuanced comparison, and hunting just might make more sense in certain scenarios. But definitely exhaust your berries and sheep first at the very least before moving to huntables. Once again, this applies to most normal maps with normal starts. If there are some funky maps in the future with different resource spawn ratios or distances, then this rule might not apply to those maps. Well, that's all you need to know about survival techniques in Age of Empires 4. Honestly, it was a bit surprising to me that it ended up being an overall efficient technology to pick up, as most eco upgrades I've tested so far mostly have had awful value. That said, if you've enjoyed this type of analytical video and would like to see more of it, be sure to like and subscribe to not miss out. As mentioned, I will be covering the remaining food technologies as well next, so stay tuned for that. As always, thanks for watching everyone, don't send more than 8 villagers out for your hunts, and see you all in the next one.